when we turn to a legal analysis, we oftentimes turn to Jay's, either our man on Fridays, Jay St. Clair, or this gentleman who is a former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, serving in the Trump administration. He is a career prosecutor and a Marine. His name is Jay Town, and he joins us to offer his analysis as to what is happening in New York City. Jay, good to be back with you. Hello, how are you?
Good to see you. I hope everybody had a safe Memorial Day weekend. Like Tennessee, state of Alabama had some serious weather Sunday, so I hope everybody got through it okay.
Hope you're well. Hope you're safe and sound up in northern Alabama. Good to talk with you. I've listened to your analysis over these many months on the occasions that I am able with regard to the trial going on in New York City. But for those who have not kind of heard it synopsized by you, what do you make of the case itself? And I mean, I understand it's an unfair ask to ask you to kind of sum it all up in a minute or two, but just give us your summation of leading to these closing arguments and handing this off to the jury.
Yeah, I mean, really, this is a prosecution in search of a law that's been broken. It started with the object of the prosecution, and then they tried to wrap a story around anything that the man did that might possibly stick. And in this case, it's a false business records case. Now, tell me why the tile in the hotel suite of Donald Trump in 2006 with Stormy Daniels is important, or whether or not he used a condom, or whether or not he wore boxers or briefs. Tell me what that has to do with a false business records entry. Nothing. It's not relevant at all. In fact, there's a great deal of testimony in this case that Judge Merchan let in that was irrelevant, that he thought he'd be able to cure with an instruction. The Harvey Weinstein ruling from the New York Court of Appeals, which is their Supreme Court, came out right in the middle of the trial, basically overruling those convictions, very serious convictions, unlike Trump's case, and based on the same sort of evidentiary rulings that Merchan has made throughout this case. And so what the prosecution is trying to show is that these false business entries were made in order to conceal another crime, which was this conspiracy to influence the 2016 election by catching and killing stories. And again, they're trying to prove campaign finance laws were broken with nothing more than Michael Cohen pleading guilty to them, right? And it's an outrage that this judge is going to allow the jury to decide if any laws were broken, which ones. They're not going to be the state didn't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that those other laws were broken, and the jury gets to pick which ones they think were broken. They don't even have to be unanimous as to which one. It's a tax law. I think it was a state election violation. I think it was federal. Oh, so you don't have to have a unanimous verdict in New York now. Is that what I come to understand our criminal justice system is boiled down to? Because the defendant is Donald Trump? It is, I've been a lawyer for 26 years, spent 22 years as a prosecutor at what some might consider a fairly high level, and I've never in my life seen a political prosecution like this. In fact, throughout my career, I resisted all of them, right? I mean, you don't make a decision based on the size of the fish that you might get, right? You base it on the proof. You base it on the elements of the crime and whether or not you can prove them beyond a reasonable doubt that defendant, that one right there, committed it. And if you can, then you go forward. Sometimes it's super unpopular. I've prosecuted members of law enforcement and gone forward with their prosecution, led the team, led the prosecution, whatever. I didn't want to do it, right? Because I love cops. I know that the immediate gut reaction of a cop is that guy probably didn't do anything wrong. Well, sure enough, a couple weeks later, they find out, well, man, not only did you do something wrong, but it was a lot worse than we thought it was. Okay, all right, I can live with that one. And so, look, whatever's going on inside of the Manhattan courthouse right now is still up to these 12 jurors to unanimously agree that, and I thought Todd Blanche hit so many home runs this morning as it relates to the elements. The prosecutor right now, so far, an hour into it, it's been horrible. what he's been drawing out. I'm assuming he's going to try to finish strong, but he started weak. But Blanche, especially on the false business record entries, right? One, they weren't false entries, and two, there's no evidence Trump directed the false entries if you believe they're false.
Well, I think we're finally, and I want you to speak to this too, Jay Town, our guest. Jay, we have yet to see the connective tissue between what are misdemeanors that have reached their statute of limitations, beyond the statute of limitations. You have to connect this with the commission of or the cover-up of a secondary crime in order to turn them into felonies. And we've discussed this for a long time on our show, that I have yet, and I've tried to follow it as closely as anybody, I've yet to see the prosecutors do this. It's fascinating to me that we can get to the closing arguments in a case and that we are left to assume what they are going to try to do in their closing arguments. And not just us, but the defense itself. And it seems to go against the premise that the defendant gets to face his accusers or her accusers, and the defense needs to know what crime they're being accused of committing. But it feels like at this point, the prosecution is finally tying those things together, and they're suggesting that the National Enquirer spiking the article, the catch and kill deal, is somehow federal election interference, and that creates the felony in this case. They're finally trying to put all that together. Speak to that. I mean, have you ever seen anything like a defendant not truly understanding the nature of the connection to the crime that they're being accused of committing until closing arguments? No.
And even then, I still don't know that it's entirely clear, because nobody's been charged with a federal election crime here, right? In fact, the feds had plenty of opportunity to do it and refused to. The FEC refused to. In fact, Judge Merchan disallowed an expert on federal election campaign violations, a defense expert, who would have testified that, you know what, a NDA payment to Stormy Daniels is not a campaign contribution. And here's why. Here's what's important. Here's where I believe the jury is going to be instructed as follows. The state wanted the definition of a campaign contribution. If you want to believe, okay, well, tell me more about this federal election violation, because I think one happened. What's a campaign contribution? Because you have to have an illegal one of those in order for there to be a violation. The state wanted the definition to be, if there is even a scintilla of a reason related to the campaign that a story was caught and killed, then that is a campaign contribution. Even this judge, right? This judge even said, yeah, no, that's not the law. The law is, and what the jury will be instructed, is that if the story or if the NDA or the payment or the money would have been paid, even if he wasn't a candidate. So if there's any other reason, right, that's good enough. Now remember, David Pecker at National Enquirer, he's been catching and killing stories for Trump for decades. Michael Cohen killed this story in 2011, right? And earlier in the year, in April, when they had an opportunity to kill it, they didn't. In April of 2016, it wasn't until, later on that Michael Cohen thought this might harm the president's chances and did it on his own. There's no straight line to Donald Trump and any sort of influence on the 2016 campaign, unless you believe Michael Cohen. Now, here's the other thing, Matt, that's important. When you're a prosecutor, as I've always been, I've never been a defense lawyer. When you're building a case beyond reasonable doubt, you're essentially building a brick wall, right? Brick by brick by brick. And you have to build that complete wall, or you will not prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. All the defense lawyer has to do is poke a hole in the wall, is knock a brick or two out. And for the last 6 weeks, the defense counsel had been taking a sledgehammer to that wall on every single witness. Almost every state witness has corroborated or exculpated, meaning given evidence that Trump wasn't guilty of the crimes of which he's been charged, as far as we can discern. And that includes Cohen, that includes David Pecker, Stormy Daniels, all of them. And so there's huge holes. Now this wall that the team in Manhattan has built, the mortar in between each brick, that's Michael Cohen's testimony holding it all together.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to believe, you'd have to swallow every word that Michael Cohen said as true. And I don't think 12 jurors can go back there and say, I believe every word. I think he's a reformed man.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Jay, but did you see where Steinglass argued that you don't have to believe that they don't need Michael Cohen in order to secure a guilty verdict? He said that in the closing argument.
He did. He absolutely said. He said, I understand why he's angry, but forgot to mention that might be a motive to lie, as they caught him doing in court, not just years ago to Congress, but just 2 days prior about that October 24th phone call. He also said about that October 24th phone call, for instance, even if you don't believe that call was the call, as Cohen testified on his direct testimony, elicited by the state of New York, okay, even if you don't believe that was the call where he told Trump, he could have just misremembered the date. Except that on cross, Cohen doubled down. He said, well, we talked about both. Even though I didn't mention the 14-year-old pranker, right, the prankster that was bugging me, and I wanted the Secret Service to raid his house. I didn't mention that, but I wasn't asked about it either. And so that's not my fault. He doubled down that was the date. He didn't say, well, yeah, I don't know. Could have been any one of those phone calls to Trump or to Schiller in sometime in October. No, no, that was not the evidence. And so again, the state is left just commenting on false evidence that doesn't exist and wanting the jury to assume their theory without proof.
Michael Rechtenwald, who was the runner-up for the Libertarian Party nomination for President of the United States of America, sharing with us how he believes the selection of his opponent, this Oliver fellow from over in Georgia, ensures that many libertarians will be voting for Donald Trump, actually helps Donald Trump in that regard. I believe that ultimately this trial, from a political perspective, has helped Donald Trump as well. I don't know. It shows, and Jay, I want to ask about your predictions in a moment, but this also, for me at least, has demonstrated to the American public the frailty of the judicial systems, especially with regard to how, when it is used for political purposes, how it's not a perfect system. Let's put it this way. A lot of my listeners have asked, well, why can't Trump do more about this naked political persecution? And I've suggested that, well, there's not a lot that they can do until appeal. So much of this will be resolved upon appeal. Even if he is found guilty, I have no, I can't believe that he'll ever actually be convicted when it goes to an appellate court. At the same time, that's not what this is all about. And that shows the naked politics of all of this. Would you agree?
Well, here's what I'll agree with you, because I have a slightly different take. So I agree that this case should never have been brought, and it was brought for political purpose. It was not brought because somebody was really convinced that they could prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, or that it was a case worth prosecuting in their prosecutorial discretion. Neither of those things are true. So to the extent that those things create this sort of atmosphere of lawfare in Manhattan, I agree. But here's what I also think. This system, as awful as it's been for the former president, he's got all the 91 counts, right? He's got, 34 in Manhattan of those counts. I think he's going to walk out of that courtroom without a conviction. And so, might be a hung jury, might be an acquittal. But if it's a hung jury, Manhattan DA can run it back sometime, and it is what it is. I don't think the case gets any better for them. I mean, usually a case the second time around does get better for the state. I think in this case it actually is going to get worse, because people like Stormy and Michael Cohen, they're going to have so many more things to say. And maybe we get, a real judge's ruling, because we can appeal some of these ridiculous jury instructions that Merchan is making. But that's besides the point. That's the system. And that's the imperfection of its perfection. It's the worst system, but for all the others. And I don't know how you could much improve it.
No, I mean, I agree with that totally.
Yeah.
I do think that the system itself was not set up under the idea that you accomplish the goals that you're trying to accomplish, regardless of an acquittal or a guilty verdict. You accomplish what you are trying to accomplish from a political perspective during the trial. Now, I don't think they've done that. I think it's actually, I think it is boomeranged on them quite a bit. They thought that this would hurt him. The process itself would hurt him a lot more than it actually has. So
you're 100% right.
So. You know, I mean, I know that it's impossible. I've talked to our good friend Jay St. Clair enough about this, my great friend for the last 20 years, and he tells me that trying to anticipate what a jury will do is a fool's errand. But I will ask you, Jay, to try to anticipate what you think will happen once the judge charges the jury and they get this case.
Well, I'll kind of give you two answers. Very lawyerly of me, I know. But I think if a verdict comes back quickly, meaning by Thursday morning or sometime Thursday, I think it's an acquittal. Normally I'd say it's a conviction, but I don't believe that 12 people are going to agree to a conviction that quickly. I think they at least feel like they have this responsibility to talk it out unless they take a quick vote and everyone's like, eh. If it's Friday afternoon at 5:00 and Marshawn's already 5 hours overdue to start his weekend based on his work schedule as we know it, then I think you're going to see a hung jury.
What do you put as a possibility of all 12 jurors convicting Donald Trump in this case?
It's less than 5%. I mean, it's never zero. Anybody that's been in my business will tell you it's never, it's never 100% that I'm going to convict a guy. And so it's never 100% that there won't be an acquittal. But at the same time, I think it's less than 5%. I just cannot see. I think these people have been given license by their neighbors and friends and family and just their own common sense to say, I don't like Trump. I will never vote for him. Can't stand a guy, but the state didn't do its job. And they don't have to like Steinglass and Colangelo any more than they like Trump. They don't know him. And they certainly don't like Alvin Bragg because they see how their damn city's been run. Mm-hmm. So there's no love for Alvin Bragg here, our hero, in his 58 regular suit, right? The prosecutors, unlike Bragg's suits, prosecutors just don't have a lot of material here to argue, right? I can go on.
I love it. I love it.
Tip your waitresses, everyone. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. The comedy right at the end of the interview. Jay Town, thank you so much for everything. We appreciate your commentary and your analysis. We'll talk again very soon.
All right. Thanks, man.